I think we're going to get started with our program for the luncheon. I hope everybody's enjoying their lunch. Please feel free to continue while we get started. Today we have another keynote speaker. In our yesterday we had a representative from USDA, the Rural Utility Service, to talk about information and funding opportunities for broadband. Today we're going to focus on PEG, and in particular the Community Access Preservation Act. But for all of us involved in SEATOA, whether it be on the broadband or on the PEG side, one of the most, or maybe the most important committee in Congress is the Committee on Commerce, Science, and Technology. You Floridians are in an enviable position because your senator, Senator Bill Nelson, is the ranking member on that committee. We invited the senator to be with us today. Unfortunately, he's tied up with hearings in Washington, but we're very glad that he sent a representative from his office to be with us today. SEATOA has been working very closely with American Community Television to help pass the CAP Act for about 6 years now, I guess it is, and hopefully it'll end soon. I want to introduce someone who's worked tirelessly to help pass the CAP Act, and who has worked very closely with our guest speaker. And so to introduce our guest speaker is Bunny Rydell, who is the Executive Director of American Community Television.
Well, I'm glad to be here, as you know, and I'm glad to see Clint Odom here because I've had many meetings with him, and he's just been absolutely delightful. I really appreciate all the staff on Capitol Hill, but Clint's one of those special people. So let me tell you a little bit about him. Clint Odom serves as Democratic General Counsel and Policy Director for the U.S. Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation under the leadership of Senator Bill Nelson. Clint joined the committee after serving as the policy director for the FCC Commissioner Jessica Rosenworcel and deputy legislative director for Senator Bill Nelson, and that's where I first met him, as deputy legislative director, with responsibility for a wide range of legislative issues affecting Florida. Prior to his Senate service, Clint served as vice president of Verizon's government relations in Washington, D.C. and New Jersey. Before joining Verizon, Odom served as legal advisor to former FCC Chairman William E. Kennard, senior legal advisor to former Cable Services Bureau, and attorney advisor in the Office of General Counsel and Wireless Telecommunications Bureau. Clint practiced law in the Washington, D.C. office, and I hope I get this right, Dow Loins? Okay. Sorry, I should have asked. And clerked for U.S. District Court Judge Henry Wingate of the Southern District of Mississippi. He is a graduate of Louisiana State University and the University of Pennsylvania Law School. And please give him a very warm welcome.
Good afternoon and welcome to Florida. Senator Nelson, as was said earlier, couldn't be here today. We are having a hearing on autonomous vehicles or driverless vehicles. And I had it on good word that Senator Nelson and Chairman Thune of South Dakota got into a driverless car this afternoon and drove some distance and have actually made it back in one piece. So I feel a little better that I've got a job to go back to when this is over, and Senator Nelson is in good health. And in addition to the near perfect weather that we have today, we are part of political history. The primary elections that are going on today are going to have a big hand in who will be our next president. And we, whether we planned it or not, we are all part of that history. So once again, whether we like it or not, Florida could have a lot to say with who is the next president of the United States. So count yourself as a part of history. And our own Senate Committee on Commerce also has an important historical role. 8% of our committee is running for president. Not many people know this. Both Senators Cruz and Rubio are members of the committee. Another 12%, arguably, running for vice president or cabinet officer. You can usually make these judgments by who has a book out. And Senators Booker, McCaskill, and Klobuchar all have books out right now, and in my opinion, would be great vice presidents or cabinet officers. But this is our day-to-day, membership, and it's a great committee and has a great bipartisan tradition, even in a political cycle like we are in right now. Let me just talk a little bit about how much the world has changed. And at lunch, I was talking with folks who are about my age, maybe a year or two older in one instance or so, but it's remarkable that for a person like myself who's not yet 50, the kinds of changes that we've seen in technology. I don't have to go back to rotary dials or party lines. I can talk about the very first job I had at the Federal Communications Commission in the 1990s, where Ma Bell, AT&T, purchased TCI, which at that point was the largest cable company in the country. And AT&T went from having 0 cable subscribers to being the largest cable provider in the country. That was the very first deal that I worked on as a young lawyer at the FCC. While I'm still at the FCC, just a few years later, AT&T exits the business altogether. It goes from being the largest cable operator in the country to not having any more cable subscribers. And Comcast basically took its place. So fast forward a few more years, AT&T re-enters the cable market through its UVerse product. And as telecommunications and franchise officers, I'm sure you have some stories to tell about your experience with AT&T as a new cable or video provider. And then in January, the day I set foot back onto the committee from the FCC, AT&T is now the largest pay TV operator in the United States. You don't have to go any farther than looking at Ma Bell to understand the kinds of transitions that we are going through in this country with technology. But it is instructive, and I think it is instructive also in terms of where our telecommunications and video policies are going in this country. And they're going toward broadband, and we should make no mistake about that fact. The world has changed, and it's going toward broadband. But video, and I parse my words carefully here. I try not to talk about cable, because cable is one means of delivering a video product. My kids, I've got 4 between the ages of 17 and 7. They don't get their news from television. They get their news from an iPad or a computer or an iPhone or a smart device. And they don't necessarily need to watch it in real time. They're content to watch their video whenever it comes up, usually on a video clip. And that's pretty much how they receive their video. These kids aren't watching linear television programming anymore, the way old dad and old mom do. And so this is a fact that is starting to change the video marketplace. You probably have heard that cable, traditional cable, is losing subscribers. How can that be? There was almost an upward trajectory for 20, 30 years of cable growing its video subscriber base. Well, we're learning that consumers, like my kids and like other adults, are taking their video not from traditional set-top box delivered cable, but they're taking it from over-the-top broadband, they're taking it from Apple TV, they're taking it from Roku, they're taking it from Amazon. So the video marketplace is changing, and again, I think this is something that we all need to give a lot of thought to. We need to think about what is the future of video, and how do we keep our values of localism, rights of way, public interest, education, government. How do we keep those values imbued in what we do? Because no matter how fast things change, if we don't have undying, stable values that guide us, we will be lost. Now, the Communications Act, for all its many faults, and the Telecommunications Act, for all its many faults, and some of the biggest faults laid at its feet are how old they are. Well, I can tell you, the people who wrote those pieces of legislation, they knew what they were doing. They didn't try too hard to anticipate too far into the future what would happen. They tried to deal with what was directly in front of them at the time, but they established values that I sometimes fear we lose sight of in policy. We have policy chasing technology, which is a foot race policy cannot win. But where we can win is in our values. And again, those are localism, their education, their government, their public interest. And so that brings us to what are some of the things that are in front of the committee, other than potentially the next president of the United States. As I said earlier, the committee prides itself on being one of the few places in the Senate where we can get things done in a bipartisan way, and regardless of the political season we're in. Many people have said, there's no way you can legislate in the middle of a presidential election. And I think if you look at places like the Judiciary Committee, which has basically said, you know what, we're not doing any business until after the election. We're not processing any judges. We're not holding any hearings. We're just shutting down. And I think you're seeing that played out in a lot of other places where it's just too hard to get things done. Well, Senator Nelson is a firm believer, even when the Democrats are not in power, that we've got to be able to get things done. And so one of the things that he is most proud of is the very good relationship he has with his chairman, John Thune of South Dakota. And we're still getting things done on the telecom front. We just recently passed out of committee the Mobile Now Act, which is designed to make sure that we have spectrum, radio spectrum, on which our cell phones and smartphones operate. We get more of that spectrum out of the hands of public users, of federal government users, and get them into the marketplace so that we can actually get a cell phone signal and have broadband download speeds that aren't basically creaky narrowband, depending on where you live. We are also working on policies that will be of interest to you, whereby when we are building federal highway projects, there's an idea of dig once, whereby federal highway projects will have trenches built along them, or encourage policymakers and states to build trenches with conduit, so that when we want to build out fiber to remote communities or urban communities, we don't have to dig up the streets and dig up the highways to get that done. So these are some of the things that we're working on. I was hoping to report while I was here that another large FCC reauthorization, well, the first in 25 years, the first time we would have done FCC reauthorization in 25 years would have been this Wednesday. We were scheduled to have a large vehicle called the FCC Reauthorization Act. in which is one of the last moving trains out of the station. Maybe CAP could have been part of it. There have been lots of ideas about other things that could have been part of it. But I regret that we have a short delay. It looks like we're going to take up reauthorization in April. So, Bunny, get your traveling shoes, get your bag ready. We've got another train leaving the station in April, and we should be talking about CAP, and we should be talking about other things as well. So I'm happy to spend some time and talk to you about the issues that are of interest to you. One of the worst sins you can commit is come in front of a bunch of folks and talk about things that you think are interesting. I'd like to take any questions from you about things that are important to you and making sure that they're in front of us and that we're thinking about them. Because in addition to a presidential election that we are looking at, that same election could have consequences for what the Senate will look like. There will be new members coming to the Senate. There will be possibly a change in political leadership. Senator Nelson could go from ranking member to chairman, could stay the same. Luckily, because we aren't an overtly partisan group, that may not necessarily change the outcomes, but it could potentially give a much more sympathetic ear and give the ability to move legislation that is important to you. So the stakes are very high, and we're very hopeful, and we're here because we want to hear from you, and hopefully we have some time and the ability to do that.
Questions?
Yes, sir.
I want to be careful because we obviously want to stay relatively nonpartisan, but having worked in the Democratic side of the Senate, would you be able to comment on just a general broad analysis of Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders on issues that would affect the NATOA family? I mean, they both have time in the Senate, but not necessarily on relevant things.
Yes. There's been some very early analysis done on what a Hillary Rodham Clinton presidency would look like, or a Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump for that matter. I can tell you in her Senate service, Senator Clinton was the hometown senator to some very large publicly traded telecommunications companies, at least one of whom was a recent market entry into video. And some of you probably negotiated with this company to try to get some PEG capacity or other capacity. I would imagine that those local parochial interests are still at play. That's a voice that she would, certainly she would listen to. I think the race, though, has kind of pushed Senator Clinton to consider more issues than perhaps she was coming into the race to consider. The Sanders effect has pushed her in lots of ways that she would not have imagined. And so I don't think Senator Sanders has ever served on the Commerce Committee. I know that he has been interested not so much in video matters, but certainly basic connectivity, Lifeline, things like that. I would not be surprised to see him concerned about the rising price of cable and looking at what levers in government we can pull to try to bring those under control. With regard to folks on the Republican side, it's anybody's guess. But there have been, if you Google Donald Trump and telecom policy, you'll come up with some people's prognostications about where he might be on that issue. But I think that's my best guess. Sure. Yes, sir. I'm very proud to be here. Thank you, sir.
Last week, I think any other broadband is a national economic priority, which will allow us to be competitive with the rest of the world. We're not way under have. So this is a bigger broadband network for citizens of the United States to fight. States are subject to campaign contributions from the incumbent that interfere with the ability of, for instance, municipalities or local government to be able to enter to Florida may be the most restricted to Florida. So my encouragement, perhaps for myself, is to encourage the senators would consider the legislation that would allow freedom for local government to enter into settlement and talk. We're talking about competing against monopoly. So I'm encouraging the senators to, especially since most of the money that our local farmers get comes through the Senate. So that's what money is not. So this is such a vital concern for all of us to be senators worldwide. And I believe it's incumbent on the Senate and leaders to allow local government.
Yes, sir. No, I thank you very much for your for the point. You may have heard that I'm a Louisiana State University graduate. I was also raised in Lafayette, Louisiana, and have had the privilege of sitting down with my mayor, now former mayor, Joey Durrell, and the LUS fiber plant manager, Terry Hubal. And when I went back to the FCC to work for Jessica Rosenworcel, one of the things I encouraged her to do, and we were able to do, is to have a sit down with these gentlemen and understand the story of what Lafayette went through in order to be able to deliver a community broadband. It's a compelling story. I mean, someone should do a movie about this at some point. But it had, as its feature, all of the villainous and glory aspects of broadband, of competition, of monopoly, of campaign contributions, and lawmakers who may not have always understood what they were voting on. Senator Booker on the committee has been a champion of community broadband and has introduced amendments in the past on community broadband. I don't think we've ever had to take a vote on it, but I know where, based on my private discussions, where Senator Nelson is. We are waiting for the United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit to go forward with argument on the North Carolina and Tennessee cases, which the FCC preempted those state laws that restricted the build-out of community broadband. The administration has been very supportive of community broadband. And I think the question, by the way, that this is a little in the weeds, you'll forgive me for going into the weeds. The judges who are slated to hear the case sent a question to the parties, asking them about the prospects for state legislation regarding community broadband. Now, I'm not close enough to see or understand how successful those legislative efforts are going to be, but the letter was instructive. It is a signal, in my opinion. I used to work for a federal judge. I know sometimes these letters aren't meant, we know the answers, but we have to ask them. And I think what the court is saying is federal actors, whether they be judges or national legislators, are very loath to wade into areas of state sovereignty. We have a federal system, we have a system of federalism, and we do not lightly intrude into that area. Now, the matter of community broadband, in some ways, like CAP, is an area involving state sovereignty. And I don't know how that case is going to come out. I'm hopeful that the FCC's preemption will be upheld, mostly because it also has implications for net neutrality, because one of the bases on which the FCC based its preemption decision was its powers under Section 706 of the Communications Act, of the Telecom Act, rather. So, personally, I'm very hopeful that the case will go well, but I think that letter from the judges to the parties shows the strain and the anxiety that the court has about wading into these areas. So Senator Nelson is certainly aware of this. He's a former state elected official. I often say you will not find a Democrat who is more sensitive to federalism than my boss. And as someone who grew up in the Deep South, I sort of understand what these words mean, and they're powerful words, and it's a doctrine that means a lot to a lot of people. So Senator Nelson understands this issue. We'll be waiting to see what the court does. Meanwhile, we will take a look at any legislative effort that is moving to maybe add some certainty to what the FCC did and give municipalities the same right that they did in the electric space or the water space. Where there's a need that needs to be filled, municipalities should be able to step in and provide that need, and do so in a way that is funded, by their own taxing and revenue raising authority. I hope that answers your question.
That would be an outstanding solution. We too view it as an infrastructure situation, so that would be outstanding.
Yes, sir. Good. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Jody Miller. I'm from Minneapolis-St. Paul, Minnesota. So
Nice
very
to meet you.
happy to have Senator Franken and Senator Klobuchar as our Minnesota senators. And I'm on the NATOA board at the national level, which is the parent organization of SEATOA. Thank you for being here today. We're really happy to have you.
My pleasure.
Following up on that, I know in the state of Colorado, you may be aware, they had something like 24 different cities last year on election day voting to take advantage of an opportunity in state legislation to exempt themselves from some kind of state law banning community broadband projects, and it requires the city to do a referendum vote. And I can't remember if they had to exceed more than a 50% majority, but all 24 of those communities passed those laws. And now we hear from our Colorado members that there's an effort in this year's legislature to do something to make that more difficult for the cities in the future. So it is a tough balance between having the state autonomy and local government autonomies versus having some kind of a national congressional action that can help in that regard. I have a question for all of our members who are PEG stations around the country. We generate hundreds, well, probably thousands of hours of election programming, candidate forums, debates, 5-minute, meet the candidate, individual segments, and so forth. And we're not always very good about tooting our own horn or making the public aware of that public service that we do. So do you have any advice for our members as far as maintaining ongoing relationships with our elected officials after the election and letting them know of these services that we're providing back home?
Sure. With the caveat that my advice is worth, the air that it travels on, I'm happy to give you some observations from my standpoint. First, I think we do these big fly-ins to Washington, D.C., and we bring our folks, and again, Bunny is a standout advocate for you. I've met with her many times, and she has my ear. She's got my mobile phone. She knows how to get in touch with me. I think going to Washington is one way to get a member's attention. Going to your home districts is another. And most Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, Sundays, and Mondays, and when they are in their state work period, they're back at home. And we were talking at my table earlier about constituent service. Members are there ostensibly to listen and to hear what people are talking about. Taking advantage of those opportunities in the state with your lawmakers is critical. Secondly, I know that this group is incredibly imaginative. I know about some of the programming that you're doing. It's innovative. Making sure that your delivery methods, your means of reaching people, keep up with the way people want to be reached is very important. And just as we talked about AT&T going from the biggest cable company in the country to the smallest, to the non-existent, back to the biggest, this is the video marketplace lurching, right? Finding a way to get to viewers who are online is critical. And that can be over the traditional cable infrastructure. It could be over the traditional satellite delivery infrastructure. It could be over the top with broadband. It could be optimized to be viewed on a tablet or a cell phone. You know, these things cost money. They require, innovation. And sometimes, listen, it may not make sense for your particular model. But I know anecdotally, and I know based on the statistics, people's viewing habits are changing. People's desire for information is not. People still want to know. But I think we have to figure out how to deliver our content in innovative ways that aren't necessarily linear. They may not be appointment TV. They may be something where you have to figure out, how to delay it or have it residing on a server someplace where people can access it. But I'm not worried about the future of PEG video, because I know the people in this room are thinking about these things, and they're going to figure out a solution. If there are ways that we can be helpful as lawmakers, and policymakers, come and talk to us about it. If I understand the frustration with having a bill out there for 6 years, sometimes, it may feel a little, it makes you feel crestfallen. But it also presents an opportunity, maybe if I could tweak it in some sort of way, that could get the support, it could eliminate opposition, and maybe get support from quarters that you had not gotten it from before. The other hallmark of the video marketplace is it's consolidating. And every time it consolidates, they got to go before the regulator and say, "Mother, may I?" And while they are in that precarious review, if there are good ideas that are presented to them that they could embrace as their own or be presented to regulators, maybe we have an opportunity here to do something a little different and something that doesn't depend solely on whether Congress can get its act together and pass a good bill. Yes, sir.
Quick question from Senator Nelson's committee. What about enforcement of merger conditions? Commissioner Cox has talked about this for years, that we some groups will oppose a merger no matter what, others will try to get in some good conditions there. To this day, every meeting I go to in Colorado, Comcast shows up and touts Internet Essentials as though they're doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. Well, you could argue at this point they've kept that on as a business strategy, but that was a merger condition. That was not out of kindness that we're required to do that. So is there any role for your Senators Committee, for example, to maybe occasionally follow up on some of these merger conditions and see if they're being...
Absolutely. One of Senator Nelson's hallmarks when it comes to communications law has been making sure that our regulators have the tools that they need and the resources they need to do their jobs. Every time the FCC announces a large penalty against a cable company or a telecommunications company, for privacy violations or for, not protecting people's personally identifiable information, or for not honoring the net neutrality regulations. There's a counter effort that comes into the Congress to strip away those powers from the FCC. Some of the biggest subjects of negotiation between Democrats and Republicans is how much enforcement authority the Enforcement Bureau is going to have. I mean, we've centralized all of our enforcement powers in one bureau, which I think was a masterstroke, because before we'd have people who did enforcement who were doing telephone work, people in enforcement doing cable work, people in enforcement doing wireless work. So we've done organizationally the work we need in creating an enforcement bureau. And that bureau is often under attack for doing its job. You can imagine how difficult it is after expending the resources to do a big merger review, getting these commitments in place, then you move forward to the next deal and to the next rulemaking. And sometimes it's human nature. We may not always be focusing on the commitments that were made. So in part, it's a resource constraint, right? But in part, it's also, potentially a political fight that regulators may not want to take on. They may not want to end up in court. They may not want to end up in an FCC reauthorization bill where their budget is being slashed and their enforcement authority is being neutered. So it's a very human problem. Money is part of it, but also supporting the people who enforce the laws. I mean, you've watched in your own hometowns there's a sense that our law enforcement and our first responders are under attack. We rally to support them. Well, who's rallying to support our law enforcers in communications to make sure that companies' commitments are being honored, that people aren't out there stealing violating our privacy, having business practices that are misleading and deceptive and fraudulent. Those aren't the people who get the ticker tape parades and get the thank you from citizens. They often end up, punished or under threat of punishment for doing their job. It's an interesting dichotomy. Yes, sir.
Hey, Gary, resident.
Oh, hey, Gary. How's it going?
I see you. Thanks for coming down. And
My pleasure.
if you haven't voted yet today, go vote.
Yeah, I'd be in jail pretty quickly thereafter. They don't take kindly to voter fraud down here. So.
First of all, thanks for coming, and thanks for all the work you're doing with Senator Nelson. What's involved in the FCC reauthorization bill? Is it involve stakeholders dealing with the FCC, including local governments, or is it just solely the FCC and Congress? Because as you know, I chair the IAC, and our term is up, and we've been asking the chairman as to what his intention is with respect to that, and we haven't been able to get a response.
Yeah, I mean, I think the FCC is kind of a passive participant in this. And I'm going to answer your question, but I'm also going to try to answer what FCC reauthorization is not. A little over 2 weeks ago, the chairman presented us with an FCC reauthorization bill, and it had stripped out of it anything that would be controversial or maybe anything that would be, on Bunny's wish list of things the FCC should be doing or Congress should be doing. It was intentionally designed to be milquetoast. So it did, for instance, a 2-year budget out to 2017, which included monies for the FCC to relocate its building. It formalized the informal practice of what happens when a FCC commissioner serves and her term expires. So it basically created, put in law the practice of allowing holdover commissioners. It, for instance, required that there be some analysis of our regulatory fees and making sure that those fees square up with the work that's actually being done by the FCC staff. There was a permanent elimination of a 2004 joint board order limiting USF to one line in the House so that one could conceivably get support on the landline side and the wireless side. These things are not controversial, and by design. What I think Chairman Thune would like to see is to see that bill passed by unanimous consent. And as a Democrat, we're looking at this and saying, wow, it's like, well, how do you oppose this? It's very difficult. But I don't think that's what, and ultimately I think John Thune wants to be able to show that he can do something that's not been done in 25 years, where we can, through regular order, reauthorize the FCC the way we do other agencies. All admirable goals, all goals that I think Senator Nelson supports. We would have seen that play out on Wednesday. We'll have to wait until April to see how it plays out. But the jeopardy, there's a reason these bills don't get, this agency hasn't been reauthorized in 25 years. It's not benign neglect. It's every time you try to reauthorize the FCC, lots of bad things can happen. The House of Representatives has its version of FCC reauthorization, and it looks a lot different from the Senate version. Some of the punitive measures that I talked about before, some of the emasculating measures of the enforcement of the FCC's enforcement powers, are in that House bill. You pass a Senate bill that seems to be milquetoast, and then you pass, a House bill that's been passed probably more than once, and then you conference these bills. The product is not going to look good when you come out of that conference. There's going to be a lot of bad stuff that no senator, that many senators would not have voted for. So in terms of consultation with the stakeholder community, I think this has been mostly a Senator Thune project. I think the FCC has been consulted on technical questions, but I would not say has been brought in, as a stakeholder along with any of our federal advisory committees, or with you folks or with even industry. It has become the thing that is worth pursuing, regardless of what's in it. It's become that white whale. We haven't done it in 25 years, so we have to do it. So let's just do it. It almost doesn't matter what's in it. Let's just do it. That's my take on it. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I run an independent highlight cooperative in North Carolina, and there's an order around the SEC really changing rural rate of return reform. And part of the issue I have, and it's going to change our industry spin, but there's a lot of pros and cons. I like to be aware of it. How do you get your thoughts on the pros and cons?
I wish I knew more about it. Let's connect afterwards. Let me get your card, and I'm going to connect you with our guy on staff who does the ILEC issues. It does. I can say one thing on the subject, though. This committee, I think, has a greater sensitivity to rural ILEC issues than many in the past, because if you look at the composition of the members on the committee, there are a lot of states with large rural populations.
Well, 30 club chart in various
Yes.
And so one thing is that the definition of broadband is 25-3, but we can only fund 10 and 1. And so rural has a $2 million budget, but it's really a $6 million problem.
Right.
What is your take on changes in contribution reform by having more entities using it and contributing to the funding mechanism in the future? Probably don't have this chairman, I think, is trying to get this done.
Sure.
But what's the potential for that in the future to try to say we have a much larger budget, we can raise the threshold for broadband, is to really push it out there and get other entities, other municipalities, municipalities.
Senator, no, I understand. Senator Nelson has, I don't know if he's spoken publicly about it, but as someone who has been around the contribution factor for a very long time, I can tell you it is, it has to be reformed. I mean, I think we're at a contribution factor of over 18%. And because we have a dwindling base of revenues on which to base the factor, there's no question that you're going to have to expand the denominator at some point. I think this commission is really trying to get across the finish line. I think it's trying to complete successfully this incentive auction. I think it wants to defend the net neutrality rules in court. I think there's a big privacy rulemaking that has been launched that they want to get through, and that and some mergers might take them through the end of the year. And so this is something that will probably get booted and to the next administration. But I could be wrong. But when I look at Chairman Wheeler's priorities, I don't see this as a must-do before December. But I also don't see any partisan rankering over the critical need for contribution reform. It's going to collapse.
All right. That's good to know.
Yeah.
I know they have a lot of issues with it, and they're kind of kicking this down. They have 5 years to do it. They'd love to see it happen way before then.
No, I hear you.
All right.
Yes, sir.
So I go along with this point. One of the things that we run into on a regular basis is that there are a lot of separate programs out there, like community connect, rural health, E-rate, along with RUS and funding, and there has been no consideration for saying, well, if somebody's going to come in with a package that is incorporating all these multi special consideration, or even speak with people at RUS, and they're saying it's actually discouraged to do it because then you're having to try and align things from different groups. When you're trying to bring it together, it's kind of self-defeating. You have areas of use, maybe it's not going to have enough funding in one area, but together it makes a lot of sense. But then just the lack of communication between the different groups administering it, you can't push a full project through these piecemeal, part of the say, yeah, we don't have the funding. It's a $1 billion problem, $2 million. Well, there's other mechanisms to support that.
Right. Universal service is, a corporation kind of in name only, right?
Separate from universal service, which is more like in the pure loan and grant and funding, and just being able to say, okay, here's a project that has all these elements.
So you're talking about multiple agencies, like so Ag, FCC, Commerce, NTIA.
Well, in this instead of RUS, where you have community connect and E-rate and rural health, and then just pure RUS loans, if you try and put an application that has key elements from each one of those in there to complete your funding, it's almost impossible to get it through.
Yeah. I wish I had some special insight here. I've been at the agency, and I can tell you it's not. It is not this way by design. And it ends up being a very kind of intramural scrum where agencies are kind of protecting their turf or advancing their mission, whichever phrase you want to use. But it is at bottom, this is just Clint Odom talking, it's at bottom a leadership issue. These are things that can get done, but they have to be the focus of the leader, not only of one agency, but of both agencies. Sometimes the administration, the presidential administration can be very helpful. They can put these groups together and they can say, get it done for the benefit of the people. We can put in place sometimes memoranda of understanding. We can do deals where we detail an FCC person to Ag or Ag to FCC, and we actually get the people in the room not thinking about who they report to and what the limitations of their mission are, but how to actually get the thing done. Now, in years past, it was not a big deal to have the President of the United States put together, independent agencies and executive agencies and have them work together. It has become, a political lightning rod these days. And we saw it, not to be opaque, but for those who remember the net neutrality wars, there was a very intense opposition to the administration's involvement in the fashioning of net neutrality rules. It had been House and Senate investigations. His House Homeland Security Chairman Ron Johnson just issued a report on saying that the FCC's independence was bowled over by the administration on net neutrality. So I'm hoping that if we can get to a point where the administration can pull together the heads of agencies, regardless of whether they're independent or executive, you might actually get some progress done there. But with all due respect, it's probably not going to happen in the waning days of this administration. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. I have one final question.
Oh, sure. I'll let you ask the question.
I just have one final question for Clint. Given the litany of AT&T transactions you mentioned earlier and the devastating effect that the U-verse boondoggle had on PEG, would Senator Nelson consider legislation prohibiting AT&T from ever being in the video business again? You don't really have to answer that.
Thank you.
I want to thank Clint for coming all the way from Washington just to see us and to ask that he give Senator Nelson our thanks for considering all the issues that we brought up here today. Thank you. Doris, is there anything else I need to?
No, just if people remember to stick around for the roundtable and turn in your evaluations, even if you're not staying for the Nobel Prize drawing.
Okay, and have a great rest of the conference.